Alright, since we are writing our Node.js server-side code using ES6, it only makes sense to write ES6 code within the browser. But browsers, as they are, have varied support for ES6 features, and we can never be sure about the specific versions of browsers that people use to access our application. Therefore, we'll use the Babel transpiler in our view pages to ensure our ES6 code gets transpiled down to ES5 and that it runs universally across all browsers. This is a safe bet. But before we bring Babel in, let's begin by going into our rooms.ejs file and we'll bring in the socket.io client library like so. I'm sure you're wondering where this /socketio comes from. This looks like a route, but we haven't created this route so far. And for good reason. Socket.io creates this route internally and serves the socket.io.js file so that we can bring it into our view partials with ease. Alternatives to this approach include getting this from a CDN like cdnjs.com, but we'll prefer this instead. Now, Babel comes in a range of flavors and for all kinds of production and tooling pipelines. We are not using a build toolchain here like Gulp or Webpack, so we'll simply use the in-browser compiler. On the babel.js.io website, if you go into the usage section's browser page, you'll be warned that in-browser compilation of ES6 code to ES5 is not fit for production use, and quite so. Ideally, a build system is required to pre-compile all scripts to ES5 before deploying on the server. I am specifically referring to JavaScript which you write for your web pages and not within Node.js. Now here, I'll still use the in-browser compiler for our learning purpose, as build systems are somewhat outside of the scope of this course. For our purpose, Babel provides us with the Babel standalone module, which we can download using npm install like so. This, as usual, downloads into our node_modules folder, and specifically we want the babel.min.js file to be brought into our view pages. So the first thing we'll need to do is to serve this static JS file. Fortunately, the Express static middleware comes to our rescue. We will go into our server.js file and use another app.use statement to invoke the express.static middleware, where we'll serve the node_modules /babel-standalone folder. This serves the contents of this folder and makes it available to us at the root. So we can simply create a script source tag and type babel.min.js, and this would bring the Babel compiler in. Simple, isn't it? Next, I'll create a script tag, and since we're using jQuery for basic DOM tasks, I'll first create a jQuery ready function like so. Now, remember I mentioned earlier that our socket.io on the client has to reach out to socket.io on the server to initiate a connection? So let's create a variable called socket within which we'll invoke the io method which socket.io.js brings in, and we'll pass in the URI to our server as a string followed by /roomslist. /roomslist here is not a route, and I will stress on this again. This is not a route. This here is known as a socket namespace. Think of it as a pipe carrying all data related to this particular rooms page. This way, we can, within the overall socket.io channel, create multiple sub-pipelines which carry unique and isolated packets of data. So, one connection but several unique and discrete data pipelines. This statement, when executed, will attempt to handshake the socket.io server that we have created in our node backend. However, try as much as it will, there is nobody at the backend to listen to this handshake. Let's put someone in charge of this process. Go into your socket module and we'll type io.off, and in the brackets we'll use the /roomsList namespace, and then using the on method we'll listen to an event called connection followed by a callback that receives a socket instance. The first part of this statement, io.off with the /roomsList namespace, means that we are now listening into the rooms list pipeline on our socket.io connection. So finally, there is somebody who's going to handshake with the client code in our rooms page. But now we want to create event listeners to act when needed. So we use the on keyword to assign an event listener for an event called connection, which socket.io on the server provides us when a client connects in. At this stage, we get an instance to the socket of the user who's joined in, and all further communication will be done through this instance of the socket. So when a user successfully handshakes in and we open a transport channel, the connection event will fire, and for now, we'll console log out a message which says socket.io connected to client. Just like on the server, at this point, when the client successfully connects, it too provides us with an event called connect. So using a reference to the socket variable in our web page, we can use the on method here too to listen in on the connect event and console log out a message which says connected to server. Let's try this out. I'll log in using Facebook, and the moment I reach the rooms page, you can see the message connected to server in our browser's console, and at the same time our socket.io on the server also prints out the message socket.io connected to client. This means we have an active WebSockets connection between our rooms page and the socket code at the backend, and that event listeners indicating a successful connection were fired as expected. Alright, one small thing that we'll do at this stage is to remove this hard-coded URL to our app and replace it with the value of the host key from our configuration module. So first up, in our routes module, we'll inject another key into our rooms page called host, and we'll bring in the config module so that we can inject config.host into the page like so. This, depending on the environment, will bring in the host URL and will make it available using EJS in our page. We'll do the same thing for the chat route as well, like so. In the rooms.ejs file, we'll then replace the hard-coded URL with an EJS call to the variable host like so. Our app still works as earlier. And if we inspect the HTML for the page, we can see the host name being correctly brought in as needed.